The Frog Prince. In the olden time, when wishes were easier to come by, there lived a king whose daughters were all beautiful, but the youngest was the most beautiful. Even the sun himself, although he saw her very often, was enchanted every time she came out into the sunshine. Near the castle of this king was a large forest, and in the middle stood an old lime tree and a little fountain. Whenever it was very hot, the king's youngest daughter ran off into the wood and sat down by the side of this fountain, and when she felt sad, would often distract herself by throwing a golden ball up in the air and catching it. This was her favorite amusement. Now, one day it happened that this golden ball, when the king's daughter threw it into the air, did not fall down into her hand, but on the grass, and then it rolled past her into the fountain. The king's daughter watched as it disappeared into the water faster than she was able to catch it. The pond was so deep that no one could see to the bottom. The little princess cried out in shock and despair.
"Oh, no!"
A voice called out. "Why are you crying, king's daughter? Your tears would break the hearts of even the cruelest." The princess looked around to the spot from where the voice came and saw a frog stretching his thick, ugly head out of the water.
"Oh, you slimy creature,"
she said.
"did you just say something to me?"
The frog appeared to nod back at the princess.
"I am crying because my golden ball has slipped away from me into the water,"
replied the princess, still not quite sure if the frog had really spoken. When he replied to her, the princess was very curious as to how this could be. "Be quiet and do not cry," answered the frog. "I will help you. But what would you give me if I brought you your golden ball?"
"What would you want, dear frog?"
said she, now excited by the thought of having back her treasure.
"My dresses, my pearls, my jewels, or the golden crown which I wear?"
The frog answered, "Dresses or jewels or golden crowns are not for me, but if you would love me, and let me be your friend, and sit at your table, and eat from your golden plate, and drink out of your cup, and sleep in your little bed, if you promise me all these, then will I dive down and fetch up your golden ball."
"Oh, I promise you all,"
she said,
"if you will only get me my ball."
But she thought to herself,
"What is this silly frog chattering about? He'll stay in the water with his other frog friends. He cannot live with me."
But the frog, as soon as he had received her promise, went to the water and dived down. Shortly after, he swam up again with the ball and threw it on the grass. The king's little daughter was full of joy when she again saw her beautiful plaything, and taking it up, she ran off immediately. "Stop! Stop!" cried the frog. "Take me with you. I cannot run as you do. Stop!" But all his croaking was useless. The princess refused to hear him. She ran quickly home and soon forgot the poor frog, who leapt back into the fountain, jilted. The next day, when the king's daughter was sitting at the table with her father and all his courtiers, and was eating from her own little golden plate, something was heard coming up the marble stairs, like a sort of splish-splash sound. And when it arrived at the top, it knocked at the door, and a voice said, "Open the door. I am here for the youngest daughter of the king." So she rose and went to see who it was that called her. But when she opened the door and caught sight of the frog, she shut it again with great distress, and sat down at the table looking very pale. The king noticed her unease, and asked her whether it was a giant who had come to capture her.
"Oh, no,"
she answered.
"It is no giant, but an ugly frog."
"What does a frog want with you?"
said the king.
"Oh, dear father, when I was sitting yesterday playing by the fountain, my golden ball fell into the water, and this frog fetched it up for me because I cried so much. But first, I must tell you, he forced me to promise that I would be his friend. I never thought that he would come out of the water, but somehow he has jumped out, and now he wants to come in here."
At that moment there was another knock, and a voice said,
"Princess, you have to let me in. You gave me your word, and so you must keep your promise to me."
The king said,
"What you have promised, you must do. Go and let him in."
So the king's daughter went and opened the door, and the frog hopped in after her right up to her chair, and as soon as he was seated, the frog said,
"Do pick me up."
but she hesitated so long that at last the king ordered her to obey, and as soon as the frog sat on the chair, he jumped onto the table and said,
"Now, push your plate near me, so we may eat together."
and she did so, but as everyone saw, very unwillingly. The frog seemed to relish his dinner very much, till at last he said,
"I have satisfied my hunger, and now I feel very tired. Take me to your chamber, so I may rest beside you."
At this, the king's daughter began to cry, for she was afraid of the cold frog, and dared not touch him, and besides, he actually wanted to sleep in her own beautiful clean bed. But her tears only made the king very angry, and he said,
"He who helped you in the time of your trouble must not now be despised."
So she took the frog up with 2 fingers and put him in a corner of her chamber. But as she lay in her bed, he crept up to it and said,
"I'm terribly tired. Put me in your bed, or I will call out to your father."
Not wanting to disappoint her father any more, the princess picked the frog up, and she threw him with all her strength onto the bed, saying,
"Now, will you be quiet, you ugly frog?"
The poor frog bounced right off the bed and landed on the floor. Knowing he would only ask again, the princess leaned over the bed to reach for the frog, but as she turned herself, she saw not a frog, but a handsome young man with beautiful eyes. Having finally kept her word of kindness to the frog, he had turned into this prince, who now looked far more friend-worthy than the ugly frog. The princess screamed in fright, and the king rushed into her chamber, thinking she had yet again refused the frog a request. The king, too, stopped in surprise and shouted for the guards, but as he did, the prince, who now stood where the frog had fallen, stepped forward, bowed, and said,
"Your Royal Highness, please do not be afraid. I am Prince Henry. I was turned into a frog by a terrible witch who sought my father's kingdom. After she was captured, I was unable to convince anyone of who I truly was, and would sit at the pond hoping for a moment with your daughter.
He said to the princess,
"Because you kept your promise to me, the witch's spell is broken. I must return to my father and prove that I have not been dead all these months. But when I return, I do wish to remain your friend."
The princess nodded, still not believing her eyes, But true to his word, after a week the prince returned, and every few days he and the princess walked in the forest near the pond where they met, and talked of many things. Their friendship bloomed, and when the princess came of age, she and the prince were married. They lived in a castle they both insisted required a magnificent pond with a lime tree, and there they stayed happily ever after.